our first speaker today, we're actually going to switch things around just a little bit and start with our IPM Minute. And our speaker for that segment today is Jacob Leeser. Jacob is an extension aide with the New York State IPM program, where he provides support on a variety of projects. Several of them relate to invasive species. And so today, Jacob is going to give us an update on the box tree moth. So take it away, Jacob.
Thank you, Matt. Happy Friday, everybody. The box tree moth is a relatively recent invasive species, at least in New York State, and it's one that is largely, almost exclusively, a pest of ornamental boxwoods. So we'll try to keep this brief. Boxwood is a very common ornamental plant. Here's a picture of the New York Public Library. Here's a picture of an ornamental garden upstate. This is a knot garden. These are traditional landscaping features, parts of the municipal landscape, and it's also ubiquitous. These are pictures back in January around the Titus Flats neighborhood up in Ithaca near Cornell University. It took me less than half an hour to get all the pictures on this slide. As you can see, it's very versatile, it's very popular, it's an important plant, and when box tree comes along, the plant can get eaten very quickly. Here's a picture of a gentleman's front of his house, and you can see the damage moves so quickly that the very top of this bush was still alive. So what's doing this damage? The box tree moth is native to East Asia. It was found in Europe first in 2006. Took about 10 years for it to spread from that first sighting in Central Europe to cover most of the continent. It's thought that there were multiple introductions, and there was one identification in Toronto in 2018. 3 years later, it was found in Western New York. The only known host in North America is boxwoods. This is called the box tree moth because there are other Buxus species that it will infest, but none of those are native to North America. So let's take a look at this insect. Here's a picture of myself and a couple IPM colleagues looking in an infested bush located in a cemetery. So it was likely first blown by some storm winds in across Lake Ontario, coming from the Toronto area towards Niagara Falls. In 2023, last year, there was a quarantine of those counties along Lake Ontario. That quarantine has since been expanded quite recently, basically to cover everything west of the mountains, west of the Adirondacks and Catskill Mountains, figuring it's going to be difficult for the moth to, on its own power, move south or east of that line. The USDA has instituted a federal order last year. What that said was that plants being produced in Canada had to come with paperwork to certify that it was clean. That federal order was updated just in May to say that plants can be moved interstate only from an establishment, only from a nursery that is with a compliance agreement. And the USDA left it to the states to determine what the quarantine areas are and what those compliance agreements will look like. This is not only a problem in New York State. There were some other introductions, probably from shipments of nursery stock. Massachusetts has seen some box tree moth. Michigan and Ohio also have quarantines in effect. So here's the insect. This is an insect that has multiple life cycles in a year, and the life cycles aren't necessarily synchronized. So we will see multiple of these life stages at the same time. You can identify this caterpillar. It's got black and white spots with black, green, yellow stripes running along the length of it. The moth, which you see in the upper left-hand corner, has these half moon or crescent moon white markings along the margin of its wings. The damage from box tree moth is characterized by feeding on the margins of the leaf, which leaves only that mid stem. So this is how you're going to distinguish it from other damage to your boxwoods. Left on its own, this is what the plant will look like. The eggs are very difficult to see on the underside of the leaves, but as those eggs start to develop, you'll get some webbing in the middle of the boxwood leaf. And then the caterpillars will emerge from little pockets that they create with webbing. Now you're going to have to look into the bush. You may see healthy leaves on the outside and then start to identify damage as you look into the interior of the shrub. A few more pictures of the moth. The life cycle is going to continue repeatedly, maybe 2 or 3 times. We're not sure what that's going to look like in the warmer climates that we have in various parts of the state. This is a pest that the state is taking very seriously because of the scale of boxwood industry. This is a quote from the Commissioner of Agriculture, Richard Ball. So if you want more information, you can come to our website, New York State Integrated Pest Management, look at the box tree moth. We have facts about the insects, the appearance, the life cycle, and ways to manage it. One way to manage it that we do recommend is starting to look for alternatives to boxwoods when you are adding plants to your landscape. We have a list here put together by Brian Eschenauer. We also have a demonstration garden if you choose to come up to Geneva, where you can see some of these alternatives like ilex and dwarf juniper there in the flesh. We also have some materials if you would like to be a resource for others. And I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you, Jacob. Some excellent information and an introduction to this pest that maybe a lot of people haven't heard of yet. We do have some time for questions. If anybody wants to put a question in the chat, Jacob has volunteered to present our next topic as well. So I'll let him pull up his slides at the moment on our next pest and keep an eye on the chat. So I haven't seen the box tree moth in particular, but the next critter that we're going to talk about is one that is starting to encroach on my part of New York State, which is the southeastern portion. And so I think a lot of people will be very interested to hear an update on the spotted lanternfly.
I see a question in the chat. Are there other known boxwoods defoliators? No, there are other pests of boxwoods. Boxwood blight, fungal disease, is something that's been very serious recently, and there have been some other management techniques for that, but that does not defoliate. Very little feeds on boxwood leaves, which is part of the reason why it's so popular. If you are seeing damage to boxwoods in a similar way, it's likely that it's either winter kill or could be some other inorganic damage, such as some sort of toxicity. So if there's been herbicide sprayed nearby. Box tree moth, when they're very young, they only feed on one side of the leaf. The underside of the leaf is a little softer. So if you get that kind of window pane die-off on the leaf, or again, if you're seeing only the stem remain on dead leaves, that's going to be box tree moth. Is there any remedy? Yeah, most insecticides, and we have a list of the ones that are certified for, registered for box tree moth on our website, but some lower toxicity remedies like BTK, which is a bacterial biopesticide, has proven very effective. The difficulty is in management. You really have to get into the canopy. Boxwood has kind of a waxy cuticle, which protects the inner canopy from sprays. So you'll have to push the leaves apart to look into the shrub to actually get that spray penetration of any of the products that you can find on our website. What do I do if I have an infestation? Great question. Thank you for bringing that up. There is a website. If you search Report BTM, REPORT BTM, there's an Ag and Markets portal. They'll ask you for a picture and a location. And so if you do see it, take that picture, send it in, report BTM. We don't expect the box tree moth to expand further east and south of the current zone unless it is moved by human motion. They don't seem to be flying on their own very far, a couple of miles a year. I think I'm going to leave the rest of that to answer later and move on to the main attraction.
That sounds great. Thank you, Jacob. So we'll have Jacob now present on our next pest, which is the spotted lanternfly. So thank you, Jacob.
Thank you. Yeah. So spotted lanternfly is also a relatively recent invasive species. It's the theme of the morning. But spotted lanternfly have been in the region a little bit longer. And it's likely that folks have heard about these. So we'll give an update. Here's the life cycle of spotted lanternfly. They hatch in May or June when temperatures start to get a little bit warmer. That first instar stage, the juvenile nymph, is about 1/8 of an inch long. And it's going to look the same as it progresses into the second and third instar. It's got a teardrop-shaped body, 6 legs, black with white spots. As we get into, as we moved into July, it started picking up that red coloration, which makes it more identifiable. It's now about 3/4 of an inch. And right now, this time of year, end of July, beginning of August, the adults start to emerge. There's one life cycle a year. This is the stage where they're the most visible. This is why we often have the most concern about spotted lanternfly end of summer moving into fall. So just real life pictures. This is what the first to third instar is going to look like, changing in size. Third instar, and here's what they look like now. They're about 1 inch long. They've got pinkish wing cases with polka dots on top and this brick-like pattern on the bottom. They're native to China and Vietnam. They are not a pest there. Part of the reason why we know so little about them is because there was no reason to research them in their native habitat. Now that they're here in the United States, they feed on over 70. I think that number is over 100 now when put into an enclosure or just observed. They'll feed on more than half of the plants in the landscape. Of crops that were actually growing, grapes, hops, and apples are the ones that we're concerned about. But primarily, we're looking at grapes as the crops that they are a pest of. The preferred host, the tree that they are thought to have evolved feeding on, is called Tree of Heaven. The scientific name, which I prefer to use, is Ailanthus altissima. This is what they look like. They seem easy to spot, especially when you're up close like this. But if you back away just a couple of feet, that pink does actually blend in better than you would expect. So how many can you see on this trunk? Take a second to try to identify them. Hopefully you got all 4. Here's what the egg masses look like. They're going to start depositing egg masses usually around the fall equinox. That seems to be the timing. They lay about 30 eggs at one time. You can see on the right They look like beads on a string. And then they go and they cover that with this putty material, which is going to insulate them from wind, rain, and keep the eggs sheltered until they hatch at the end of spring. They don't always do a perfect job, as you can see, but this is what we'll be looking for in the winter. They don't only lay egg masses on trees, they will lay them on effectively any surface. This camping chair on the left was lying down, and when they picked it up to move it, they found these egg masses on the bottom. On the right is a post that's used to hold up grapevines on a trellis. So they're happy to lay egg masses on canvas or on metal. This, in fact, is probably how they move around as much as they do. They're also only going to fly a couple of miles on their own, but they'll lay eggs on materials that are then transported great distance. So monitoring is incredibly important. When you're moving vehicles, they may be there in the grille or on the underside. Here's pictures of them blending in on concrete sticks. We also get reports of spotted lanternfly egg masses that end up being lichen. So clearly they're easy to confuse. I'm also going to add another maybe pest that is Ailanthus itself. Ailanthus has been present in North America for over a century. It was first brought in a garden, but then that escaped and now can be found across the entire continent. So here's what it looks like. You can see on the left, the bark is relatively smooth. I like to compare it to the skin of a cantaloupe. In the middle, you can see a good picture of that compound pinnet leaf. Each leaf is made up of several leaflets that are similar to sumac and black walnut. You can tell them apart because Tree of Heaven has these winged seed cases on the right. They're usually a bit redder than that in person, and you can see them from a ways off. That's quite different from the seeds of black walnut or sumac. Other ways of identifying it, each leaflet has these thumbs, these extra nodules on the side. The compound leaf can be up to a meter long. And those are just close-up pictures of the samara, the winged seed case, and the skin. So that was a quick aside on the host plant, because we may want to know where to look when we're scouting for them. But where is it now? Here's our latest update on the spotted lanternfly distribution map. You can see that most of Pennsylvania has reported infestations. Now, just because a county is reporting an infestation doesn't mean all of the county is infested. It may be present along roads or rail lines, and other parts of the county are not seeing it yet. But the way that we are reporting it goes by county. So the first introduction was in southeast Pennsylvania, and that checks out on this map. You can make out the roadways going west across Pennsylvania, south into Virginia, and north into New York City, and then up to Buffalo. There are places where individual spotted lanternflies have been seen, including in northern New England, but no infestation has been identified. And we generally say that if you're seeing juvenile nymphs, it's likely that they hatched where they are and there is an infestation. There's also an infestation in Cleveland, and those were originally found around train yards, so places where there's a lot of interstate travel. So how do we manage them? Here are a couple of traps that you can use, and these are mostly for protecting a single tree, or they're used to monitor for the presence of spotted lanternfly. The sticky band on the left, this is a product called Bug Barrier. We don't necessarily endorse any single product, but this one has the advantage of the sticky material is facing inwards. spotted lanternfly crawl up and down a tree over the course of a day. As they're crawling, they get stuck in that sticky material, which is held out from the tree by a roll of fabric. Other insects that don't have this crawling behavior won't get trapped. Similarly, on the right, here's our summer intern putting up a circle trap. This similarly takes advantage of spotted lanternfly crawling, but funnels them into a catchment container that's going to be attached to the white funnel on the top there. So why are spotted lanternflies such a problem? Because you don't have one of them, you have a swarm of them, especially in the adult life stages. They tend to gather in one place and they feed very heavily. As they're feeding, they are pulling sap out of that plant. That is the sap that the tree is, or the vine is producing for its own reserves. That vine that was subject to heavy feeding in the previous slide may not have enough sugar or carbohydrates in the roots to ripen that fruit this year, or to come back and come back to life in the next year. That was the largest problem for the grapevines and the vineyards in Pennsylvania. We now have some management strategies. They're not difficult to kill in conventional farming, but that does introduce a lot of pesticides. So we'll get to that in a second. The honeydew is also a significant problem. As they feed, they excrete honeydew, which is just sugar water. It's lightly processed tree sap, but that sugar water is able to facilitate mold growth. Something called sooty mold can be seen underneath plants that are infested with large numbers of lanternflies. That honeydew is also sweet, so it will attract other insects, including stinging insects. So even though the spotted lanternfly doesn't bite, doesn't sting, it may be responsible for encouraging other biting and stinging insects. So here's the mouth part that's it's going to put into the plant material. And here are some common plants that we'll see them on. Again, it will feed on over 100 plants. These are the ones that we see the most. There is a seasonal effect. The juveniles prefer rose and thinner, more succulent plant materials, while the adults are going to move on to stronger trees, including willow and maple, things with a lot of sap flow. There is a perimeter effect. We don't tend to see spotted lanternfly on the interior of established forests. They like the younger growth at the edge of a forest, as does tree of heaven, which really thrives in disturbed soil. Another picture of them feeding on grapes. And as I mentioned, the vineyard in that case didn't come back. So here is a picture of the spotted lanternfly swarming on a maple tree. And nearby, here are some steps. That bottom step was power washed. The shiny coating on the second and third steps are the honeydew starting to grow a little bit of sooty mold. This is the main concern for homeowners. Now, there is biocontrol. These are things which have been brought into a lab, are starting to be developed. Bavaria bassiana is a product that in some cases is available as in a spray bottle. It's stabilized spores. And there's currently work going on to isolate the strain that works best for spotted lanternfly. Fatcoa major is another species of fungus that was found in the wild infecting spotted lanternfly and is being researched for its potential as a biocontrol product. Management also includes egg scraping. Each egg mass that we're able to scrape off will be 30 or more spotted lanternflies that are not going to hatch. So you can scrape those into a bag with a little bit of ovicide, a little bit of some product register to kill spotted lanternfly eggs, and not have to worry about the nymphs coming out. Tree removal is also an option. The thing to remember here is you cannot simply cut down Ailanthus. Ailanthus is prone to root suckering. That means when you cut down one trunk, 5 or more trunks will grow up from the root network, and they could be a few feet away. They're going to come back to life the next year. It is important to kill Ailanthus properly by introducing an herbicide into the roots of that plant. So if you want to see a little bit more about spotted lanternfly, you can come to our website. Again, New York State Integrated Pest Management. We have a link to the reporting portal there, but Ag and Marcus has also set up reportslf.com, just like Foxtree so what else is going on? Well, we have our IPM program. The entomology program at Cornell is also doing this research into biocontrol. Pesticide safety is PMEP. I have that typed in wrong. They're doing some work to establish what pesticides are safe and effective on spotted lanternfly. That list can be found on our website. And we're working with grape specialists in county offices to make sure that everybody knows. Regional coordination is being done by our partners at Northeastern IPM. Here's my email and a general email for IPM. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacob. There's a ton of questions that came in for you. I can start at the top, or if you want to pick through the chat, you're welcome to do that.
Yeah, I'll ask you to read them off.
Sure. Let's see. So someone wanted a little bit more history on how they actually got here and when that timing might have happened.
Sure. So they were first identified in 2016. The state plant regulatory official in Pennsylvania got a phone call. Somebody said, "I don't recognize this insect." And the state went, it was in Berks County. And the kind of geographic center of that was a landscaping company. So based on the population, they figured it might have been introduced 2 years previous, based on how much it was already dispersed. So the first introduction was likely in 2014 on some materials that were shipped to Pennsylvania. Again, if you think about how easy it is to overlook that egg mass, that could have been on the bottom of a pallet carrying any sort of supplies. And yeah, so somebody put in the chat, it was probably in 2014.
Great. And just looking at the time, maybe we'll do one more question and then we'll end our session for today. But somebody wanted to know if there are any predators, natural predators that have sort of adapted to feeding on spotted lanternfly.
Yeah, there's actually a great citizen science project managed by a PhD student in Penn State. So if you go to Facebook and type in birds biting bad bugs, you can see everything that eats spotted lanternfly. And that is the answer. There are a lot of predators that are generalists. So we have robins, backyard chickens, wheel bugs and spiders, praying mantises. Again, generalist insectivorous predators are feeding on spotted lanternfly. We expect that it's going to take some time for the behavioral learning, for the behavioral evolution to make a difference. And there's also research suggesting that as spotted lanternfly feeds on Ailanthus, it is sequestering bitter compounds, similar to what monarch butterflies do with milkweed, and that will decrease how palatable they are. But as Ailanthus is reduced in the population through in the landscape through management, that natural predation will hopefully become more significant.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jacob. We really appreciate you doing both presentations today. You provided tons of wonderful information. We will get to answer the rest of the questions in the video description. We do hope that you attend future First Friday events. Our next month is September, and we will be talking about some back to school pests, including bed bugs, how to prevent your children or grandchildren from getting or bringing back bed bugs from school, and then also some IPM related messages about head lice. So thank you, everybody. We hope you have a great weekend and tune in next time.